2020. My name is CJ and I'll be chairing this round. Judging with me is Paul. Paul, please introduce yourself as well.
Hi everyone, this is Paul. Good luck with the round.
Great. Yup, I think we can start debating on the motion this House would prioritize producing art that aims to highlight unified struggles against the colonizers over art that emphasizes only the specific struggles of your ethnic minority during colonization. Calling on Prime Minister.
By the way, if ever we might sound choppy, kindly tell us since we're prepping within the school, so the Wi-Fi might be fleeting or something. Thank you so much.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Adrian. I'll be PM. POIs through chat. I'll be starting in a while. So yeah, confirming audible. Starting in. Also, if you're using a POI, I'll be recording my speech, so just take that in mind in case it will be recorded. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The tribes of Sudan were able to thwart British forces, but when you allow one tribe to take precedence over others, what was once a period of peace post-occupation has become a struggle of conflict, a violent exercise of tribalistic pushes that exacerbate existing struggle. I want to frame this debate in a couple of ways. A state that has just been disenfranchised and just successfully persevered from the West is at the biggest junction of state unification. To thwart the oppressive West, you need to gain traction from a significant majority, and you also need to get a certain level of stability at this critical juncture of time. As an artist, your interests are tied to your multifaceted identity, which are one, as a citizen of that nation, you would like to help in contributing to a stable nation and defend from other waves of colonization. Two, as an artist, you also want to forward your career by being supported by a lot of people. This is true for most people because it is the most realistic frame, given that while we may all have some degree of altruism within us, a lot of us also care about self-preservation and forwarding one's career. But more so, this actor, since they have the status quo of being the most nationally revered artist. And three, as a minority, you also care about forwarding your roots. This is something that we deal with later on. You would argue that even if it means not prioritizing it right now, you can still co-opt the benefits to an extent and service to them in the long run. These states operate under multi-ethnic states, so we can assume that there is a diverse set of individuals within this nation, probably because of tribalistic norms. What does this united struggle mean? One, it will be collective in nature. This means that before and probably after, there were different contexts for which these tribes operate on. Prior to occupation, these tribes would have been separated because they have resources that were intrinsically scarce. Second, they are multifaceted. These are minority artists, so there is an incentive to be multifaceted in nature. And thirdly, it's likely to be all-encompassing. So it's likely that you include their struggles as well because everyone did fight against colonization. I want to preempt opposition here because Op will say that people will still struggle. But when people have been fresh from the trauma, when Britain just left Malaysia, people's trauma have been so visceral that it will be crucial for them to work collectively to recognize this, that all their traumas remain legitimate and any sense of distrust is bad for them as a whole. Argument one, why will the united struggle likely be done representatively? Opposition will say that voices will be whitewashed because of Western influence or that we completely erase the contributions of minorities in the struggle. This preempts the case from opposition that it will just be majoritarian-centric. First, the fact that you're a minority means that you have the capacity to correct it. When you're a Bicolano painting an artwork in Cagsawa, you obviously have the roots of your place of origin. You are inherently linked to where you come from. So an ethnic minority born in Guyana will probably not forget their roots even when Venezuela overtakes them because you were born with that identity. You have the inherent capacity to correct it within yourself. Second, you are deeply respected as an artist because you have gained the trust of other individuals. The fact that you are nationally recognized means that people have collectively agreed that your art has value. You offer meaning to people's life because they know your art is crucial in the development of the country, especially in a state that has just escaped Western occupation where people's lives have been trampled on. So obviously, as a national artist, you have the incentive to opt in because you do not want to lose this trust at all. You don't want to get out just because you are choosing a specific ethnic minority over others. You care about the momentum of your credibility. You are literally a national artist, for Christ out loud. In the future, people have cognitive biases like seeing you as a bad artist simply because you so chose to paint one over the other. And thirdly, there's still regulation to ensure representation on our side. People are so fresh from the trauma, the visceral experiences of death are still fresh in their mind. So anything they do is so hinged on their lived experiences right now. The inflammatory experiences make them so reactionary to the point that it backfires on you. So you are risk averse to do things very well. You do not want to have this backlash trample on your own identity as a national artist. On opposition, you inherently choose one over the other. And when you do that, you inherently lose the regulation that is allowed for you by the national public as a whole. On weighing that, this argument automatically responds to opposition because when they say this will be dominated by a single minority group, because you have the incentives to ensure representation because of the possible retaliation on you, no thank you, which you do not want because you don't want to lose your credibility and status. The impacts are clear. This is the only way to ensure that the collective struggle allows people to be attached. Before Western colonization, people from different tribes have inherent differences that make them separate entities entirely. People are in a fight or flight situation for their lives because they need to survive. They take crucial resources for themselves, like how the Magawa tribe opted to hide their own mineral supply chain prior to Western occupation. People are so tribalistic in nature to fend for themselves because their situation requires them to do so. It is only when you capitalize on this collective image you've built with the people that the force was used to defeat the West can be used for the state as a whole. You unite everyone. You don't just choose a single identity to make the art war, and thus you prevent fracturing because you ensure you are cohesive and have a national identity. You prevent the tribalistic nature of individuals from dominating the state. Obviously, this significantly lessens violence because art will not be used as propaganda by warring ethnic tribes in opposition. You allow the tribes conquered by the RSF to trample on their Muslim counterparts because art proliferates the violent narrative further. POI go.
All right. On the government side, there is a saturation of collective suffering of art, which becomes repetitive at best, since you're probably not the only ethnic national artist in your nation. Why is it still fine?
Yeah, because you're still a national artist. You care about whether or not you include all the minorities because you were nationally selected. You're not just selecting just one. Argument two, why is exclusionary art inherently bad? And this responds already to opposition. Exclusion is bad in art because people still remember the visceral trauma from the oppression of colonization. If you paint only a single ethnicity, you inherently allow people to forget the other struggles. And since this is post-conflict, just escaping Western occupation, you need to ensure that they don't forget the collective struggle as a whole. People are likely to doubt and question you. They are very sensitive to the fresh post-colonial state that you are in because the scars of the people dying are still in their eyes because they still know that their relatives have just died. They know the blood and shed and tears that have been shed. People are going to question you in opposition. If you leave specific tribes behind, it'll be hijacked by conservatives because obviously you still have the West trying to thwart whatever you have. You have the West imposing economic embargoes after it released Sudan post-conflict because obviously opposition's case merits fragmentation between your tribes. When this happens, the narrative of some tribes taking precedence over others will then occur. The action of individuals is likely to be biased because they obviously prioritize their tribes over the rest. They'll feel so attacked because it becomes an us versus them narrative, feeling like artists are selective in choosing which tribes to prioritize because of the perceived perception that this is more minority over others, when obviously all of you have collective trauma because you all suffered under the oppressive regime of the United States, for example. This debate is about prioritization. Even if there are some stories in opposition, I'm engaging on their very best case now. They aren't the norm. These are not what most people see because they see the collective struggle as a collective state. So the harms in opposition are unlikely to accrue even when you have some stories being hidden. This is a very clear frame. Very proud to propose this motion.
Thank you so much for that speech, calling on Leader of Opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay. Just allow me to set up a timer. Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. Just give me a moment. Um, we are in a very bad net connection area, So if ever I get choppy, just feel free to badger. But only in that instance. Yeah, Zoom is telling me my connection is
No.
unstable. I will take a
Yeah, it's starting to get choppy right now, even before you start your speech. So, I
my
think
goodness.
so you may want to turn off your camera.
How about right now?
Can you try speaking the motion just to make sure?
Okay. This house would prioritize producing art that aims to highlight unified struggles against the colonizers over art that emphasizes only the specific struggles of your ethnic minority during colonization.
Yep, I think it's better.
Okay. All right. Again, take ang POI at the fifth. We'll be starting my speech in a bit. God, okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think the important thing that we need to highlight in this debate is how government is incredibly narrow-minded. Because while is an actor motion and it is to serve the interest of the actor, I don't think they actually serve justice towards justifying why the artist supposedly only interest is to one, serve your country, and to be able to maintain your credibility as a nationally revered artist. When the nuance in this motion, it was very clear right from the wording of the motion itself. There are two clear principles that will be battled during this debate, which is one, your interest as an artist in serving your obligation to your country, for example. But secondly, probably your interest in giving justice to your people as well and the struggles that they face then. In forwarding that, there is one priority framing that I felt needed to be said in this debate in order for it to actually be fair, which is what does an ethnic minority actually look like after a post-colonized state, right? Which is three things. One, this ethnic minority is probably prioritizing rehabilitation. This is a rehabilitation in terms of resource mobilization and in terms of recovering their own houses, their own areas. This is likely because they live in the most isolated areas of the state, for example, in which they're not the most proximate towards direct help, especially from more industrialized areas. But secondly, they are probably recovering their own culture as well, or are concerned for the preservation of their own culture, likely because when Western or any smart form of colonizers colonizes a country, they probably prioritize making sure that there's cultural erasure, or they make sure that their own culture stands above those. And the most affected by that are obviously the ethnic minorities, whose culture doesn't stand against a more majority culture that was probably already put in place in that state, or probably was there to begin with. But three, this group is probably also clamoring for media attention, likely because this isn't something that they've gotten the most, especially when they're not the majority population of that particular country. This characterization is important in the form of four primary reasons to government. So at my second minute, I'm already weighing, right? Firstly, it ties back to the general interest of the actor as part of the minority and why it's the most important. This is likely because A, not only do they have immediate family and relatives from that minority, people they care about who are largely affected, and likely because it's something that they personally resonate with as part of that minority, even if they were nationally revered. But B, this is something that they obviously care about because this is something that speaks directly towards the identity that they use to market as well as a nationally revered artist. So even by the pragmatic framing of government, this stands. But second, it ties back to what government claims that the and that not what government claims, right? It is a direct response to government because sure, while you want to forward the progress of your country as a whole, you are not the only artist in your nation, but you are one artist from one ethnic minority. This means you have to weigh that the primary obligation should be to your people first, and it probably serves your interest more in something you actually want to do in an actor motion. But B, your credibility and reverence is not the most proximate concern to you as well, because the best art pieces are timeless and gain national reverence when that standard is met. It will stand even post regardless of what you do afterwards, because an artist's career isn't contingent on the actions they do, but rather on the art that they make and how it stands time and time again. What then does this mean? It means that government has to save their case, right? Because not only is it narrow, but it also does not cater towards the best interest of the actor. But three, it only caters to one very primary interest, and in comparison to opposition, we've already targeted and weighed to you what exactly should we cater to the most in terms of what this actor actually wants in this debate. Then, so if we're going to be looking at it, this is the case from opposition. One, you have an obligation to bring attention to your people. I'm gonna prove to you why that's something you want to do first and foremost. There are two structural reasons for this. As a nationally revered artist, you are proximate to many influential figureheads. This means that while your country has escaped colonization, it also means, as even framed by government, that you have the most connections. You are very well networked in comparison towards your ethnic minority group. As I've stated before, that's probably clamoring for media attention or clamoring for any sort of attention in general. This means that while you are probably in a position of privilege, it means that it is in your interest to serve these people because they were directly affected and don't have the most proximate help, especially when these are people you actually care about. And it's something you mark your identity as a nationally revered artist, right? But second, being nationally revered also means you have a platform, which is obvious, right? It means that you are somebody that is not only revered by figureheads or influential politicians or by the state, for example, but you're probably revered by very many people within the state outside of your population, outside of your ethnic minority, who actually subscribes to your art and actually sees it as something that spiritually
You are.
enlightens them or something that spiritually allows for them to resonate with whatever self-expression that you were giving. This means that it is within your interest then to be able to capture the essence of your own self-expression through your people's struggles. It's because when you're actually marketing this, not only are you also still catering to the pragmatic interests of government, right? But secondly, you're also catering towards your own opposition's primary interest of making sure that your people actually get the attention that they deserve because they're the people most important to you. Why is this the most important interest in this debate and the most important case in this debate? This is where I start to compare by looking at the impacts. Firstly, obligation is a shared interest on both sides, but it is only in opposition that you get to fulfill this the most. While government says that they want to forward and they want to push national progress further by being able to
Before
empower
6.
a lot of people. Is anybody raising a POI?
Yeah. So our
5,
argument
4,
says
go.
that we avoid infighting which would damage minorities the most as one of our impacts. If your main case is to say that we bring them awareness, which weighs more?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're fighting when the colonization is already over. But if you are going to be fighting anything, obviously you're going to be fighting for your people and what attention they still have in a post-colonized state. You're still the only artist from ethnic minority that is nationally revered, in contrast to a whole state where a lot of equally nationally revered artists can do the same thing that you're proposing to do by weighing. Obviously opposition wins. That is a very nonsensical POI. But second, even if government says that you are not the best arbiter of change because you weren't as directly affected as your own people because you were nationally revered, it's okay, because then it's even more in your interest to put your people first, because this means you were and are in a position of privilege that you have an obligation to your minority, which is likely because this is the community you grew up in, where your family in the generations before it came from, and probably the very history that you profited from if it's the form of artworks that you actually created before the colonization or even during the colonization itself. But thirdly, right, even if government says that we can only forward national progress post-colonization is by making sure that you depict unified struggles, one, we don't think that this is the most proximate concern, but it's much better able to actually go towards your most proximate concern, which is to your people, and allow for them to have progress in the interests that I've listed to you before. This is the clear tangible benefit that you only get from opposition, which actually caters to more vulnerable stakeholders in this debate, and it's clear which people we have to cater to more, and which people the actor itself is actually interested in catering to. This means that government now has to save their case because otherwise we don't know what we're fighting for. Very
Thank you so much, Common Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll just drink water. Can you grab the laptop? Thank you. Just going to make sure that I'm fully audible, Jun.
Yep.
Oops. Ano ba yan, gago? Char. I'll just drink. Okay, sure. I'll just drink water. Okay na. Okay na. Mm. Ah. Um, wait lang. I have a very dry throat. POIs on the chat. I can see the chat. I'll just record my own speech and I'll just time my own speech. If ever I become choppy or like disconnected, kindly interrupt me in any given time. Wait. Oops. Again, we'll just record my speech. POIs on the chat, pronouns, he or him, or they, them. Oops, sorry. I'll just begin. Speech starts in 3, 2, 1, and go. I want to answer one key clash in this debate before I go to the extension on why you create better nation building for everyone in general. The first clash that I want to settle is that what is the best interest of this actor? What did they say? They say that, firstly, we should care about rebuilding your own community because your own community was economically harmed from the colonization. Firstly, this problem applies to all ethnicity, regardless of your affiliation, because everyone just recovered from the colonization because it is a collective struggle, which is why we argued perfectly right from leader coming from Prime Minister that it is important to maintain the momentum of the collective identity and trust because this is how you are able to recover better. So I am highly doubtful how can we recover better under opposition if you are all alone, if you don't create a sense of connectiveness. So therefore, which is why the comparative of government in this debate is better because you are able to tap to the collective effort of everyone because you are able to create that commonality that bridges the differences between all ethnicity, which is why that's important because that is how we are able to make people trust one another and that's how we are able to create relatability and commonality because this is quite important within the debate because before colonization, people are already tribalistic in nature, which is why under opposition, you bring back that in fighting and you bring back that tribalistic because there's no sense of collectiveness under their counterfactual. So under opposition, there is no sense of interconnectedness. So therefore, rich communities that are more privileged are likely to hoard their own resources rather than being altruistic. The comparative is better because if we create a united struggle, we are able to create that united identity that regardless of your color of your skin, regardless of your language, for example, we are all interconnected and we should look beyond our own differences. That is why you are able to have more resources for nation building because you are able to appease everyone, which therefore creates that leeway on how we are able to benefit these minorities. The second thing that they say is that, oh, we should care about your principles because you're affiliated with your own people and you have that strong obligation. Firstly, we agree, but they assume that under their counterfactual, it leads to the betterment of their own community, which is their core contingency, which is highly dismissive to Prime Minister because we already talk about distrust, we already talk about infighting on why these minorities will be fucked over if you necessarily worsen the trust of individuals on the ground. Notice that the core contingency of leader of opposition is about, oh, this artist is deeply respected, but that mechanism already falls, which all of their impacts rely on, because we already preempted it right from Prime Minister that exclusion art or exclusionary art leads to backlash and internal doubt because people feel so sensitive, people feel so left behind, because who the hell are you to say that my own experiences, my own struggle is less important than theirs? So therefore, you create that infighting. But secondly, they assume that we cannot do it in the future. So therefore, if I am able to prove later within the extension that you are able to appease the struggles of the unique struggles of the minority within the future, and why that's comparatively better, therefore we win on their own metric. I'll just flag it later. The third thing I want to say is that this person is not only from the minority. This is a multifaceted identity. So just because you came from the Tausug region, for example, or Tausug clan, for example, doesn't mean that that's your only identity, because we would suggest the fact that everyone appointed you to be the national artist, for example, means that you have the collective identity to relate with everyone. But fourthly, under their counterfactual, you create an oppression Olympics where you pin people against each other because you say that, oh, my oppression is more valuable than yours, so therefore you must be silent, for example. So therefore that is terrible because you invalidate other struggles. So I think therefore in this point in time, LO needs to prove why you should still able to gain your momentum and your credibility, because that is the core contingency of your case. So therefore, if people hate you, if people have cognitive bias against you, therefore none of their impacts manifest within this debate, which is why I want to go to the first extension, why even in the best case of opposition, that we remember the specific struggles of the community and you care about more about them, for example. That is unstrategic for nation building. The first analysis is that if it's true that you care about more about your own minority, about your own community, to the extent of drowning out other stories, that is terrible because of the following reasons. Firstly, it is easier to hijack your intent and motivation in order to paint it in a negative light, because the fact that you only care about one community is a big red flag that serves as a signaling mechanism towards everyone else that you are selfish, that you are unrepresentative, and you don't have strong principles when it comes to the nationality of your own state. Why then is this true? There are two mechanisms. Firstly, within post-colonial states, there are a lot of fragmentation, which leads to the rise of different factions, different key figureheads within the state. This looks like the military junta and the democratic movement within Myanmar right after they were colonized by the British and Dutch. So therefore, this will be the active forces who will heavily scrutinize and who will heavily question your own credibility as an artist. But secondly, these counter forces are likely to be successful with their smear campaign against you, because it is easier to buy into their own anti-minority rhetoric because it seems so convincing to the average person, since it's easily recognizable when you choose to sideline the stories of other individuals, given that they are extremely sensitive during this time where people feel that they need to be represented because the trauma is still fresh. And given the fact that people are so sensitive during this time, most people would believe that this far right groups, for example, is something that is legitimate, which means that you strengthen their numbers because recruitment is way easier. Before the impacts, I'll take a POI now. If there's none, I'll just proceed. Impact.
Okay.
First.
Firstly,
Okay, go.
Hello. Okay,
Go.
A, your frame is unrealistic because it's not proximate to the actor's capacity. They are an artist, not a revolutionary. But B, prove why the actor cares more about the general majority than their own community, who we've already proved suffered more in the post-colonization or in the colonization in general.
Girl, you're missing the point. Our point is that you should gain that momentum of credibility because your impact is reliant whether people believe you or not. So therefore, if people are so mad because you are excluding other stories, you don't get that stability and you don't get that betterment for the minorities, because people are likely to ignore you, people are likely to hate you, people are likely to have more violence and things like that, ignoring the analysis. What are the clear impacts then? First, op benefits of safeguarding the minority is reliant on external trust, which we prove already that you don't get under their counterfactual. But even if you are deeply respected now, that is fleeting and ever changing, because you only gain that trust by appeasing everyone. But opposition ruins that credibility because of the perception of bias that happens. Why does this impact matter within the debate? If people are paranoid on whether you are truly representative or not, your art and its message will be taken in a negative way and it will be diluted, which means that ops benefits cannot fly. But secondly, you bring back the ethnic tension during pre-colonial era, because before the West came in, people were tribalistic in nature. People were divided based on communities. So therefore, you create a more instability and more distrust that leads to democratic backsliding, since people cannot fully cooperate to the fullest extent. So therefore, the system that op has in this debate is biased and oppressive. The comparative is better because firstly, you cannot force government to ignore these minorities altogether, because we point out that in this debate, it's a timeline problem. If you choose to highlight your own struggles of the minorities now, you breed infighting. But if you do it in the future, you gain the credibility and the trust of everyone. For all of this reason, none of their benefits accrue and the comparative is better. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that speech, calling on Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, just making sure if I'm both audible and visible. And I think yeah.
You
Yeah,
are
it's okay.
shouting.
Just making sure if I'm audible and visible.
Hello? Hello? You're
Oh,
choppy.
okay. What about this? I'll
Uh,
just turn off my camera since I think it's my.
yeah. Alright.
Hello?
Can you try speaking the motion?
I'm choppy. Okay. Wait, give me a moment. I'll try to fix it. What about this one? Is this better?
Can you try speaking the motion?
Motion. Wait, sorry. Give me a sec.
Or just random?
This house would prioritize producing arts that aim to highlight unified struggles. Like, hello, am I still not audible?
I think
Just
you're
clarify,
audible
I'm
now.
reading the motion.
You're audible.
Okay, I'll read it again. This house would prioritize producing art that aims to highlight unified struggles against the colonizers over art that emphasize only the specific struggles of your ethnic minority during colonization. Is this
Yep.
clear?
Yep, it's better.
Great, perfect. POIs at the 5th minute. I'll take one, I promise. Just please don't badger and just search it maybe twice, and I'll take it, I promise to you. Can I borrow another timer, please? Can I bring the record as well? Thank you. And timer. Stop. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. In the aftermath of colonial rule, art is a powerful tool in shaping the narrative of a newly liberated nation. The actor has an important role where the choice lies between telling a singular, unified, or embracing the diversity of voices that fought for our freedom. As an artist, particularly from ethnic minority groups, prioritizing the unique struggles of these communities is essential. The government may push for unity, but their approach risks erasing vital histories and creating a fragile and unsustainable identity. Clarification panel. The opposition can get that they are not the only national artists representing their minority group. This directly addresses the POI about saturation, which was crucial and a winning point left inadequately addressed by the government's soft and safe case. The government's concern about oversaturation of minority narratives are unfounded, as multiple voices from the same minority can express different perspectives without overwhelming the national narrative. This is likely due to one thing. One, art serves as a vital performing for expressing the struggles and histories of marginalized communities, offering a powerful medium for self-representation and identity preservation. But pertaining to my rebuttals, right, it is in analysis rebuttals, in the aspect of misunderstanding the nature of collective healing. The government argues that focusing on a unified collective struggles is the best way to heal national wounds. However, healing does not come from suppressing individuals or group traumas. Collective healing requires acknowledging the different ways groups were impacted by colonization, but closing over these differences, ignoring the specific struggles of ethnic minorities, creates long-term resentment and fractures the unity that they seek. But secondly, in the aspect of commonality without erasure, while the government stresses the importance of commonality, unity should not come at the cost of erasing minority narratives. Commonality can be built on shared goals of freedom and justice, but these goals were experienced differently by different groups. Highlighting specific struggle does not undermine unity and enriches it. Recognizing the unique challenges faced by minorities strengthened the national story, as what Abed and even the first speaker mentioned. But in the aspect of tribalism, tribalism is not the issue, ladies and gentlemen. Exclusion is. The government wants of tribalism in specific struggles to emphasize. This is a false equivalency. Tribalism arises not from acknowledging differences, but from excluding them from national narratives. By silencing minority voices, the government risks fostering division, as these groups will feel ignored or suppressed. But let's proceed to my expansion, right? It comes in four folds. One is the pragmatic need of representation. I'm going to do a comparative. As the most nationally revealed artists from a minority background, you hold the responsibility to ensure that the struggle of your community are not erased in the pursuit of singularity national story. Ethnic minorities like yours endure distinct hardship during colonization, often being disproportionately affected by policies of assimilation or marginalization. It's artists that highlight these experiences, they remain invisible post-independence, leading to further exclusion. But secondly,
art is often the only platform where these minorities' voices are acknowledged. If the state's narrative only focuses on the unified struggle, the specific hardship faced by ethnic minorities are overshadowed by the majority story. Let's do an IR extension because that's what they want, right? Take Algiers' war for independence. While all Algerians suffered under French colonial rule, the Berber people face unique challenges, reducing this to a generic Algerian suffering narrative, erases their contribution, perpetuating marginalization. Art, in this case, becomes an essential tool for historical telling. But secondly, let's do a comparative on both models. On the government model, it focuses on unified struggle, may seem appealing for building a cohesive national identity, as what they all mentioned. However, this approach imposes a homogenized narrative that inherently benefits the majority, while further marginalizing minority groups. It glosses over real inequalities and diverse experiences, which risks repeating the exclusionary tactics used by the colonizers. By erasing these differences, it deepens societal divide, leading to long-term instability. While on our side, in opposition, our approach centered on emphasizing minority struggles, allowing for a more nuanced and inclusive narrative by giving ethnic minorities the space to share their experiences. This model creates a more legitimate post-colonial identity. Structurally, it fosters national unity through inclusion as a minority feels their history are valued and respected. But on the aspect of comparative between unity and representation, on their side, they argue that highlighting unified struggles builds a stronger national identity. However, this unity is artificial as it ignores the distinct experiences of ethnic minorities, forcing a singular narrative, risking these groups, leading to long-term conflicts or even rebellion, as seen with the Kurdish minorities in Turkey and Iraq, where forced national unity exacerbates tension over time. Compared on opposition, in which representation is prioritized, minority struggle creates genuinity. Last, recognizing everyone's history. When marginalized groups feel their stories are told and heard, they are more likely to participate in nation building. A clear example is South Africa's post-apartheid, where prioritizing indigenous and minority struggles in the national reconciliation process led to more enduring societal peace and cohesion. But share you I before I do weighing in both best case and worst case.
So why can't we do it later? Because in a later point, people are more appeased, they are less sensitive, which means that the majority is more likely to listen since they don't feel so neglected in the short term.
We can't do it later on because these things are in need. These things need to be heard by the people itself. If we try to silence these things and delete these things from the later part, it's not going to be highlighted. There is no risk of importance, which might cause like exclusionary problems when it comes to the historical precedents of the people. But let's do weighing, right? So the web is going to be burdened. In government's best case, the government may achieve short-term national cohesion through a shared narrative struggle. However, this unity is fragile, built on suppressing minority voices over time. This leads to resentment and demands for justice compared to opposition. We still achieve national unity, but it's inclusive. Minority groups feel seen in value. Why is our best case preferable? Create an inclusive national identity that recognizes and values the diverse experience of all ethnic groups, especially in minorities, which tie back to the actors' needs and actors' responsibility, which is to represent their people, to represent their shared struggles and even their different struggles, as what we've mentioned by Kara. On the worst case, right? Let's do a weighing as well. In the worst case, the government attempts to create unity backfires as minority groups feel further alienated, potentially leading to political conflict or even secession, while in opposition, even in our worst case, when minority struggles may cause initial division, our model still encourages dialogue and recognition. Why is our worst case still better? Our model still engage in necessary, so difficult conversations about ethnic minority struggles, ensuring that these tensions are addressed upfront, even if this leads to short-term discomfort. It prevents long-term resentment and conflict, allowing marginalized groups to feel heard early on, in contrast to the government's model, in which it only prioritizes homogenized narrative and breeds long-term, especially if you come from the post-colonized state or a post-colonized nation, in which there is a need of different narratives, there is a need of different stories, which is only exclusive on the side of opposition. How to oppose things.
Thank you so much for that speech, calling on Government Whip.
Hello. Okay. Wait. Hindi mo nag-echo? Ang you'll do outside. Just to clarify if I'm both audible and visible, I'll take the voice, please.
Yep, audible and visible.
Thank you. I just realized I was muted pala here. Okay, I heard you now. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. It's not that we don't care about our minority group. It's not that we don't care about our roots. June was very clear from the very framing, from the get-go, that we do. The main question of this debate lies is where do our actions best serve the minority group given the political context of the situation. But I'm telling you, even if you are to believe on their side that we may be leaving out some stories, that we may be leaving out some nuance, we already gave you the multiple trade-offs from the very beginning as to why this is bad. Principles and principles alone can't win you the debate when people are angry against your home nation, against your hometown, when people are always constantly bickering, and when there's a result and going back to tribalism. Let's deal with two main issues in this debate. Firstly, where do we serve the minority better? And secondly, on the case of the nation, since these are the two identities of this artist that they care about most. Firstly, we talked about why there's a multifaceted display about these types of groups, and therefore why there's multiple reasons from June telling you why they're likely to not make it majoritarian centric and why they're likely to have it multifaceted centric since there's a collective struggle, and since this is an artist that cares about their image and because this is the most strategic thing to do. They say that why is this the tipping point, right, against commonality? Like why suddenly commonality is brought down on their side. But they don't deal with the second argument as to why exclusionary art is going to be bad, coming from both external and internal forces, and from the extension of Abel, why it's going to be hijacked at the end of the day. The second thing that we told you is about why exclusionary is bad. And they say that, oh, actually, tribalism comes when you actually neglect these people at the end of the day, when in reality, June already told you that tribalism existed pre-colonial times, which means it is the unfortunate reality that we have to deal with, that tribalism was already there to begin with. The question now is where do we suppress it the most to have a sense of momentum, to have a form of collective identity? They have a timeline problem. They just assume that tribalism happens afterwards when you suppress these groups. No, tribalism already happened beforehand. June already gave you multiple examples as to why tribalism was existent to begin with because of scarce resources. They didn't respond. They just asserted that, oh, it actually happens after. We gave you why it happens before. It's their burden to respond to prime. They didn't. So the tribalism case response false. Thirdly, we told you why it's therefore unstrategic because A, it will be hijacked either coming from external sources because there's a thing called recolonization, leader of opposition. Just because you staved them off now doesn't mean that they would try to do it again through embargoes. That's what June also told you. And B, it was also unstrategic because people can hijack it from inside and can use different meanings not only to dilute it, but also to make it a very nefarious case when you have the best intent at the end of the day to highlight your own people. Now, again, the only response they have to say is, who are we staving off? There's no more colonizers to begin with. We told you that A, have a sense of recolonization, infighting which they have to deal with at the end of the day. I don't think they ever dealt with the concept of people being tribalistic pre-colonial times and why there is a continued struggle, and therefore that is the solution to the tribalistic problem that happened and existed beforehand, not after deputy leader of opposition. They then say another last response to try and take down this case is saying that, no, there's an oversaturation of these types of things. But I don't get it, right? If you are to agree that you're the most nationally revered artist, as they say, and that you are put in a pedestal, these harms will be magnified on opposition side. And that is a trade-off that they should have been willing to take. So overall, we gave you reasons as to why people will ultimately be violent to your minority group at the end of the day, while you will lose legitimacy as an artist. And these are things that are at your heart, and these are the standards that opposition use. I think we win them outright from our arguments alone. But how did we deal with their arguments? The first argument is purely principle. They just say that it's an obligation to bring attention to these individuals as well. The two responses that we have are pretty simple. The first is, if it is true that you are nationally selected from a multifaceted nation to begin with, it means you have to assume that you are connected to multiple groups to begin with. So therefore, if they say that there's an obligation for you to represent this, well, you also have now an obligation to represent all, since you were selected by all to begin with, to be nationally revered at the very get-go. So in terms of principle, I think they are also letting go of some principle on their side. But secondly, and this is where killed their case, we told you why the prerequisite to this principle only lies as to whether people would be good in receiving the message to begin with. We gave you multiple structural reasons from both June and Abed as to why this is not the likely case, given that there are multiple nefarious actors that would try to break you down, whether historically or like artificially existing, right? Now, you can't say that, okay, fine, at the very least, they can get their benefit of principle. But what is the impact of the artist at the end of the day? I'm not sure why the artist would like to forward this goal and forward this music at the expense of not only him but or her, but also their community being hated upon because it would be painted in a very bad light, even if you have the best of intentions. Because art is a two-way street. You cannot just dictate that, oh, this is what the meaning that I'm trying to say. You also have to take into account how people are going to and give the backlash to begin with. We don't think that you dealt with that with your first two speakers. We think it's too late at VIP. Before I take the POI, they also then say that, oh, we force them to be silent now. The thing is, even if we suppress them now, there are two things that could happen. Either A, we assume that these people are really violent with each other. If that's the case, on our side, sure, maybe we give up suppression to an extent because they say that, in order for this argument to work right, if we suppress them to that bad, it means that people are very bad with each other to begin with. And then at the very least on their side, we don't we don't strike a civil war. Because if they are that bad at relating to each other to begin with, then it's going to be worse if you have inflammatory messaging, which is what we said on both sides. Before it move on, point.
All right. The reason why tribalism happened and peak in that time is due to your collective framing struggles where you have to minimize or even shun the voices of the least minority on your side. Government has been soft-line at best in this debate, Chair, nor creative as to why it's necessary to impede the inequality of suffering at the expense of collective struggles.
That is historically inaccurate. You can't just say that we have tribalism in the Philippines now because the Tagalog dominated the post-colonial era. Tribalism happened during Magellan times. Tribalism happened even when we fought back Magellan, right? I think that's historically inaccurate. But secondly, if it is non-violent, right? Because that's the case. If it's violent, then on their side it's worse because it's civil war. If it's non-violent, then Abed's case works because you can do it at a point in time later wherein people are much more receptive because there's a collective identity to begin with, and they're much more appeased with each other. So in the case of the minority, maybe we got some principles of attention and bringing them proximity, right? But the point is, we don't ensue violence upon them. Very quickly on the state of the nation, because they don't have a constructive case in here. We told you about Western recolonization and infighting and civil war. What did they say? Other individuals can do this anyway. But we agree that you're the nationally revered artist to that same extent. And if you do actually highlight a certain group only, what you are doing is going against this momentum of shared collective identity. We choose peace on our side of the House panel. We're the only team to actually take the trade-off. And if they don't recognize that our side is the prerequisite to theirs, it's not our fault. It is a government win.
Thank you so much for that speech. Calling on opposition, Will. Up whip.
The whip will use my device.
All right, sure, no worries.
Hello, can I clarify if I'm clear, not audible?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just set up my timer. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in three, two, one. This is an actor's motion, meaning the interests that you should be championing are those of an artist from an ethnic minority. This is why, insofar as government's greatest
All right. Hello. Hello. Up whip.
priority is nation building and tribal priority and interest is that of the nation's immediate. Hello, can I
Hello?
clarify? Am I still audible? Yes.
You are audible now, but you get
Hello, was I choppy?
You got cut
I think
off
we need
for
to.
a very long time at the start of your speech. So I suggest you restart.
There is really something wrong with the phone.
Okay.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, so I'll be restarting my speech. But can I clarify if it's still a bit choppy now? Can I read the motion and then clarify if I'm on?
Sure, you can do that.
Thank you. This house would prioritize producing art that aims to highlight unified struggles against the colonizers over art that emphasizes only the specific struggles of your ethnic minority during colonization.
Yep, it's clear now.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry for the really, really choppy. Yeah, okay. Restarting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This is an actor's motion, meaning the interest should be that of championing those of an artist from an ethnic minority. This is why, insofar as government's greatest priority is nation building and tribalism, they lose because they assume an individual artist's immediate and priority interest is that of the nation's immediately. Only from Kiara and Art do we hear a fairer and more debatable set of interests, meaning that the artist wants to fulfill one, their obligation towards their nation, while not undermining the justice that they also want their people to have. Two, they want to preserve their culture and identity through art. And third, they want to aid in the recovery of their ethnic group in their state post-colonization. Given these interests, what are the most contentious issues that this debate tries to resolve? It's on where are we best able to cater to the interests of this specific artist. The first issue then is on which side are you able to fulfill your obligation as a member of your state, but also as a member of your minor ethnicity. Government tells us that the most approximate duty is that to your nation because you're nationally revered. But on op, we tell you that it's exactly because you're nationally revealed that you need to use your status to call attention towards your own people who have faced the most of these struggles, especially during colonization, where your ethnicity was probably erased during these colonization times. This is something that ARC already tells you that government does not respond to. Note panel that it's your people who are the most proximate to you as an identity you grew up with and who need your help, especially because you're an ethnic minority. Your parents, your friends, and your relatives are probably part of this ethnic
Hello?
minority. Two,
Hello?
you're not the only artist. A unified struggle doesn't fall only on not the only artist who is nationally revered. Yes. Yes.
Sorry. I'm the chair.
Hello,
You
Chair.
got like cut off for a very long time again. I stopped the timer at 1:35. You were talking about the weighing on the obligation of the artist. So you already said, PM said, they are nationally revered. You said it's exactly the reason why they should use their voice to be able to amplify the struggles of their minority.
Was my LO's device a bit more clear? Maybe I can try
Hello?
using their device.
Uh,
Hello,
you can try though.
Jar.
Hello?
We're going to use devices.
Hello. Yes, okay, sorry for the feedback. Yeah, sa audio.
Hello?
Okay, we're gonna try to let Web speak in my device instead.
All right.
Is it much clearer here?
Yep, it's much clearer there.
Yeah. Yish, sit here na lang, and then speak here. Try speaking from this angle now.
Hello, am I audible from this angle or from this
Yep.
distance?
Yep.
Okay.
Just speak louder.
Yeah, I think it's.
Okay. The part where I got caught off was on the clarification, right, or proving.
The last thing that I heard is that your family and friends are also part of that minority. Chat.
Okay. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. Note panel that it's your people who are most approximate to you as an identity you grew up with and who need your help, especially because they're an ethnic minority. Your parents, your relatives, and your friends are probably part of this ethnic group. And two, you're not the only artist of your nation, meaning that the burden of fulfilling this
unified struggle obligation does not fall on you alone as a nationally revered artist. But second, if it's not you who calls attention to the struggles of your own ethnic group, then who? This is a problem with government's entire case, because the moment that they choose to highlight unified struggles, they push the burden of ethnic representation towards those who are already oppressed, marginalized groups, who, by the way, are still recovering from colonization. Then if a person from your ethnic group who is not as nationally revered as you has to choose a struggle, would they be as heard as you? This is a problem with government's case. They are also probably under the same discrimination that these very same majority groups help you with are still currently facing. What is government's best case in this case then? They tell us that insofar as you were appointed to be a national artist, you should give back to your country. But first, the nation chose you, and it wasn't you who chose to be revered, meaning that just as a child doesn't choose your parents, you didn't choose to be obligated to your nation simply for being revered. But second, opposition clearly responds to this when Kiara already told you that the marker of your identity is already set in the artwork before you were nationally revered, and it's probably the reason you were nationally revered in the first place. Meaning that if people wanted to hate your culture from the get-go, they would have already done so before the post-colonization. You brought your people to the spotlight, and this is how you continue being in the spotlight by highlighting the struggles of your very same people. Insofar as government's best foundation is to say that an artist cares about your current clout and your momentum of being nationally revered, you fail because you already forget that the person you most owe your obligation towards to is your people and your ethnic groups. But another thing government has repeatedly been saying is that humans are tribalistic by nature, meaning that you should identify with your nation now or face fragmentation. Honestly, so what if you're tribalistic? Art already told you that tribalism isn't even the most intuitive principle or case here, because tribalism is rooted in the exclusion of my ethnic minorities even pre-colonization. But secondly, this tribalism is exactly the same of the world government tries to perpetuate, because instead of highlighting the struggles of the minority groups, they choose to benefit the majority at the expense of the minority. What you're doing is to continue the exclusion of these minority groups from the same unified struggle that you want to identify with. But yes, POI.
So we agree this is an actors debate, which is why rebuilding also benefits the minority. But moreover, you are missing the point, because maintaining your status is the only way to help your own community, even if there are other artists. So if people are so distrustful of you, then people won't get the message. Why is that preferable?
I think the one who's missing the point is you. Because the point is you're already nationally revered. You don't need a momentum because you're not an artist who is still currently on the rise. You're somebody who's already nationally identified with, and the nation already knows you as an artist, meaning that the art that you produce will already gain the traction that you need to call towards struggles of people who really need it, meaning your ethnic groups. The second issue then is on the immediacy of solving the problems of the minorities who are not able to afford this representation, rather than saying nationalism now, minority later, because we get more clout. Meaning the second issue is on where you are best able to preserve your culture and best afford just and proportionate representation to your people. We are very clear that post-colonization, this ethnic group in this state looks like the one that still struggles with rehabilitation and recovery. This looks like still trying to preserve a culture that was probably trying to be erased. And third, this is also meaning a group that tries to clamor for representation that is barely afforded to them. A stronger government could have run that you probably owe most of your obligation towards the people who helped you in achieving this revolution, or you're not the best arbiter of change towards these ethnic groups because you're a nationally revered artist and you benefited more from your ethnic group. But this case would still fall even if government ran it, because we tell you that insofar as you have a platform to talk about the issues and the struggles of your people, you have a heavier duty towards the same people who you probably centered your art around in the first place. Why is this better than government? Because government's best solution to representation is to say that the moment you choose a unified struggle, you also call attention to your minorities as if it's an immediate trickling down of media representation. But panel, insofar as there's an absolute lack of how they mechanize this or how it's even likely on their side, they fail. That's why on Art and Kiara's arguments, you are the most approximate person and actor whose duty falls towards the community you grew up with. This means that the moment you fail to prove your duty towards these people, you also fail your duty as an artist who probably benefited off these struggles. But what's their best case? Let's say that sure, you strive for national identity and you achieve this. Why is this still harmful? This is harmful because there's a lack of immediacy on solving the problems on the vulnerable actor's side. What does government achieve achieve then? You get a national identity that is short-termist at best because you only want to solve the struggles of a unified government instead of those who really needed it. But the worst case on our side then is to say that sure, if fragmentation and there's a lack of national identity is completely lost, why is it still better? It's still better because at least even if you didn't choose your nation and the unified struggles of your nation, you achieved and you championed the most approximate harms towards the people you identified and grew up with. This is something that an artist of an ethnic minority would prioritize, and we also prioritize the second actors. For all of these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for that speech. Now calling on opposition reply.
Okay, I will be up reply. I was LO, it's my device. Can I just confirm if we're still audible?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Starting my reply in 3, 2, 1. There are two major points to why government spectacularly fails in this debate. Firstly, on framing and engagement, government gives us three key frames for every single one of their impacts and conclusions. A, that post-colonization, the population adopts a tribalistic nature. B, the actor has credibility to maintain. And C, the state is equally disenfranchised in all areas. All of these points of frame fall by two levels. A, by relevance, these points are already decimated because not only were each of these countered and disproved by opposition, namely when we told you the extent of the actor's interest from LO and the tangible benefits that the actor wants coming from DLO, but B, even without our engagement, their justifications don't stand because these points don't represent the full extent of the actor's interest and how their actions impact the debate. Notice that the biggest impact all these frames lead to from government is only
Hello.
that depiction of unified nation. Notice, Chair, this is the same concede that national progress is of course a benefit. A, it was better proven from LO why the actor would push for ops comparative. But B, it was better proven from DLO and OPWIP how these benefits is significant and impactful to the actor, which Gov never actually proved above saying, quote unquote, the state will hate your work because it simply does not make logical sense. Review your notes panel because what government not only needed to prove is how it ties back to what the actor wants, but also answer Ops' question. If it's tribalism that is the problem, then why are you contradicting the cause by providing it as a benefit? Namely, by risking exclusion of your own people, you gain the benefit of lessening people hating those same people. If we follow government's logic, then it's worse for them because by risking the exclusion of your own people and overshadowing the culture of your own minority group by catering to a larger interest, they are likely to hate you instead, which benefits opposition because not only did we prove to you why your people's opinions, why your people's perseverance is more important to you, but we also disproved to you why this logic does not make sense at all, which was extensively talked about coming from Ark and Yisha, which they never had to do, by the way. But because government incessantly pushed it, we decided to engage, which I feel is a net positive from opposition. This is debate winning. Second point of downfall then for government is on content alone. Notice how opposition is so much better, not only because we were able to provide for you those key interests, but secondly, because the impacts are actually realistic and cater more towards what we're supposed to serve in this debate, which is how does the actor want anything to play out in this debate, right? But secondly, what action is much more what's action is much more representative of who they are, their identity, and what it means to actually create art. This is something that was extensively discussed from all opposition speakers, which is actually catering towards not only the relevance towards this debate, but also towards the true nuance of this motion. This is an art motion, and the impact of it does not just rely on what the state looks like, what the state's incentives are, or even what the actor's own incentives are, but towards how that translates into the action that is supposedly given and how we strategize on where we better cater these interests. What then was government only able to accomplish? They were only able to tell us that you're only going to be capable of actually creating change as the actor if you decide to push for a more majority safe option by catering to everybody's interest. I think the only way for them to have been able to win this debate was to actually prove to us, one, why this matters in a general sense of how the actor wants everything to play out, but secondly, to be able to prove to us why your people hating you is something that is less significant to you than everybody hating your people. I think this is something that they still needed to prove. It was never proven. Opposition already wins at the end of this debate. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you so much. Government reply.
Hello, hello. Can I be heard?
Yep.
All right. Sorry, my speech naman. 3, 2, 1. Imagine your name is Abed, a national artist from the Tausug tribe in Holosulu, and suddenly, when you released your exclusionary music, your group got hate crime. It doesn't matter if you released it with good intent. What matters is how the people experience it. How would you feel? Safeguarding your legitimacy is the best way to ensure that people listen to you. When they perceive you as exclusionary, then whatever impacts you can get are unlikely to accrue to the same extent. First, Opsmin's entire case was a burden push to defend minorities. Their case is contingent on whether people actually trust your messaging. If it's so upfront to your own experiences, then it eliminates necessarily all the rest. You are a national artist and everyone is looking up to you. But when you lose that credibility, your message has less value in terms of messaging. I just want to call out Opposition Whip here, who probably wasn't listening to me and Abed. Clearly, Prime and Deputy tell you that the reason why you are a nationally revered artist is because you have traction across all tribes collectively. LO attempts to prove that they cater to minorities more. We were already quite clear at Prime that there is tribalistic infighting because of the fight for resources, which has existed even before the colonization has happened. So we prove that when you are selective at which minority you prioritize, you necessarily trample on all the rest. Opposition's case is inherently exclusionary because you still build on the narrative that your culture takes precedence over all the rest. Note that on both sides, the recovery from the occupation is still an existing problem, which you flip across three speakers. When you focus your attention on tribalistic infighting, you give precedence to the pre-colonial narrative of warring tribes against each other because people remain entrenched in tribalism for as long as their main call for collective trauma has been diluted. People are obviously dying. We flip LO entirely by preemption by extents. The harm of resource-driven infighting outweighs any impact you deliver, even in the best case on op. In fact, Abed was quite clear that even in the best case that op does get more credibility from the minority itself, your national reverence is now lost. All the impacts are reduced because your national artist status is virtually useless, even if you advocate for them, since the optics among the entire country would be far worse. But even if you have national artists, you were clear that it doesn't matter. You proved that this specific national artist will be harmed, so you care about the impacts on your minority specifically, which we prove at Prime already. We prove that this leads to massive harm by extent. This is terrible for the artist. You feel as if you were the one who caused the infighting in the first place because it's so controversial to the point that your people are now being harmed. The impacts are clear. This is terrible to anyone, to any minority. And even if you have other artists in op, it's about your credibility in the moment anyway. When you lose that, you prove quite clearly that other national artists will be perceived more credible than you because the optics from other tribes will then be worse. Our impact is clear. You cannot give value to your minority group now because tribalism tramples on your very messaging. Obviously, I think everyone in the room cares about minorities. No one here is questioning it. I'm not a white person. But the problem in opposition is how you attain that sense of care. Opposition's case necessarily forces these warring tribes to abuse the art that you're forwarding. DLO needs to understand that tribes existed before colonization because of scarce resources, because of the incentive for survival, clearly framed from Prime. But in all, because optics for minorities are worse, retaliation is now on them, and precisely because they are minorities, they are on the worst end of the scale. This flips the harm on Gov exclusively. If you have more collective art, you maintain stability, which includes these minorities as well. Then Op tried to prove that this is urgent. DLO says that there's a dire need highlighting minorities right now. First, we get no analysis as to why this is such an urgent thing to run. We prove why in states that this has just persevered against all odds of Western power, that their individual separation narratives are not the priority, but also two, minorities are better off when they wait for the right time. No one here is contesting minorities. I don't think it's fair for Op to push this constantly because Prime's entire argument was proving how minorities will be better off. But also, it disengages the West from capitalizing it because it prevents recolonization from US embargoes to conquer you against by neo-imperialism. But lastly, If these tribes are so inflammatory because of the war, then the visceral experiences will be so influential in the reactionary responses of the people. The harms of violence will be exacerbated. Let me be comparative. If you do it now, people are still sensitive. The harms will be far worse. But if you do it later, people will be more receptive to the messaging. Your art has more value. This is a clear government win. Very proud to propose.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for that series of speeches. You may now cross the house. Paul, let's go to feedback one voice channel. Please wait for us.
Yes.
Ross, thank you for the round.
All right, Paul is now connecting. All right, like Paul already connected to the audio. So is government here?
Yep.
Opposition.
Here.
All right. So hi everyone. Welcome back to the round. Again, I'm CJ and I was the chair. So I'm just here to announce a decision, but Paul gets to deliver their oral adjudication first. It was a unanimous win between me and the other judge. So the win goes to side opposition. Again, Team Ikeda Hall wins the debate. So Paul, you may start now and then I'll go after. Thank you.
Great. Can somebody confirm if I'm audible?
Yep.
Hello. Great, cool. Uh, just a disclaimer. In case I get choppy, just send like a message in the chat because Butuan is crazy, Wi-Fi is crazy. But yeah, anyway. So hi, I'm Paul. I was one of the judges in for round two. My oral education will compartmentalize to three parts. Firstly, my decision. Second, my general comments, and then lastly will be the justification, which includes what teams were able to prove, as well as how did we weigh in from there. Sorry. Great. I'll be starting in three, two, one, go. The decision was unanimous. It went to opposition. The decision was opposition. Before we try to weigh in the entire debate, what matches were able to prove, let's first talk about like one general comment, which I felt like really needed the debate in terms of the discussion, right? I feel like the debate was slightly below average simply because of two reasons. I think there's one. There's a large assumption in terms of the impact in which art is most likely going to pass towards people on the ground. Either it's on the interest of the actor towards nation building, or the interest of the actor towards highlighting minority struggles, right? Because I feel like both government opposition assume that one that people are more likely going to cause like us more likely the reaction that you get from people are highly substantive to the extent that they immediately jump on something that's inherently bad because it contradicts the struggles in which people already have. But also, they as both teams also assume that the entire perspective on people when it comes to art moving forward are only going to be perceptive in the long run rather than trying on what's going to look like for people more so right now, right? Because there's one key framing that needs to be established in debate. It's on how people perceive art coming from post-colonial states, and I feel like there's an incentive that both teams also assume that the incentives that both teams also assume that the incentives that both teams also assume that the first for trying to talk about to or their advocacies, especially that come in to when they opt into the proximate interest of the actor residing on both respective teams, rather than trying to talk about the inherent intricacies that an artist, especially a revered national artist, is going to have when they take into consider both of their cases, right? So this looks like that in order for a government to fully accrue their benefit of lingering like impacts when it comes to nation building, they needed to posit how a revered national artist is most likely going to be a greater catalyst to pushing forward the unified collective struggle that they want to posit. This goes to also the same way to opposition in terms of positing that how can a national revered artist more so highlight minority struggles as well that are not counterintuitive to the already present values that a national artist have, knowing that they already have a wide network, for example. But beyond that, the debate was solely judged on what happened, nothing more, nothing less. Let's first talk about what government was able to prove, and then opposition, and then try to weigh in from there, right? Government came to debate telling two things, right? That one, that the interest of the actor, especially as a most nationally revered one, is contingent on two factors. It's one, pushing forward the career of the national artist in terms of aiming to push for the unified collectiveness, especially from states that are already been released from Western colony, for example. But also, it's contingent on the trust that you are enabled to garner, especially as a national artist. You're more likely going to make sure that your career is kept intact, for example. Deposit then that because of these interests, you're more likely going to accrue collective portrayal of unified struggle because you're more likely going to create a better nation building, i.e., unifying people from post colonies because it's the most detrimental aspect because communities under these isolated communities under these post colonial states are isolated. It means that there's more likely going to be infighting, for example, that needs to be corrected. Opposition tells then that the interest of the actor is contingent to portraying the struggles of minorities contingent to during colonization, right? Because even if you're a national artist, for example, and you come from minority background, it's best that you translate your art to portraying minority struggles because it better highlights the problems in which specific ethnic groups have experienced during the colonization of Western states, for example. They posit then that this translates to how the symbolism in which post-colonial states, for example, coming from these minority groups, are more likely going to participate to better nation building because these translate to how minority groups are better seen and better illustrated with the struggles that they have, for example. How did I weigh this then? Two metrics, for instance. instance. Let's first talk about one on the principle and the interest of the actor and how the actor has been able to garner that said interest, for instance. The principal is credit to both teams simply because of two reasons. One, I credit this coming from opposition because opposition was least able to posit that the interest of a national artist, even for it to be placed on the national scale, that they can at least able to establish minority struggle spotlights during colonization because of two simple reasons. One, even if you're a national artist, the accrued benefit here is that you at least have a better platform to establish the struggles of minorities, as well as the capacity in which you are able to accrue the needed aid for these individuals to be able to be seen on the national scale. Because opposition argues that the instance that national artists are at least able to encapsulate the struggles of minorities during colonization, this guarantees that these minorities are at least able to prosper, in which one, they are able to participate in nation building, but two, they get better representation and symbolism towards how they're at least able to be a part of the collective struggle that the state is cordoned into. But they're at least able also to establish that since these actors, for instance, are able to highlight these struggles, this is already as an instance better off because when you're a national artist, it means then that there are also other national artists that can focus on collective struggles, and it's your opportunity then for you to grab that spotlight and pull it towards these minority struggles, for instance. Government takes this principle then because also government at least able to posit why the accrued benefit of a revered national artist is contingent on pushing forward your career, because it's safe to assume that as a national artist, you're more likely going to need to fulfill your credibility as well as keep intact the credentials in which that you are able to accrue, for example. But in terms of the garnered trust, for instance, coming from government, I credit this only to extent simply because of two factors. One, while I do think that logically that a national artist still needs to accrue its garnered trust in order to propel their career, government doesn't necessarily prove why that garnered trust is still detrimental to that artist, for instance, when you're already established as a revered national artist instance. Opposition already argues from this point in fact of their case that because you're already a revered national artist, you already have enough of a credentials, enough of a support, and enough of a network for you to at least be kept intact for an nth amount of time, for example. So it felt like even if government was at least able to posit the interest of the actor towards this principle, they weren't able to fully establish why the trust in which translates to their nation building and the career, for instance, of the national artist outweighs the already intrinsic narratives and values that coming from opposition. Second metric then, it's on the weight of the symbol in which the actor is most likely going to have, and how you're more likely going to accrue better benefits towards struggles in which your state is most likely going to accrue, right? This is the tipping point when it comes to debate, and I feel like opposition takes this like by a mile. But let's first talk about government then before we try to talk about the opposition takes this metric. Government assumes that when you're an actor and under the pushing forward your career and your proximate interest is to portray a collective struggle of post-colonial states, for example, they posit then that because of this unified struggle, you create better nation building under two folds. One, you prevent any infighting and you promote better strength towards nationalism coming from people because you're more likely going to stray away from the shackles of the colonialism that you've already been susceptible into. But also, they talked about the extent of the nation building towards the participation of people towards how they view these artists, for instance, and how they view the states moving forward. The only reason why, despite the nation building discussions coming from government, doesn't really fly as much compared to opposition, because government doesn't necessarily prove why the instance of participation as well as nation building translates to the entirety of the prospects coming from all communities coming from in a debate, right? Because opposition argues that the minorities need symbols under these post-colonial states because they have very isolated cases towards their struggles, and there's less incentive for minority groups to participate or partake in nation building because of less incentives for them to be represented and symbolized coming from under like coming from under status quo, right? Government needed to prove why the instance of nation building is better accrued, especially coming from opposition, that with the presence of other national artists that already established collective struggle, there is at least their most revered national artist that translates minority struggles towards colonialization under symbolism towards post-colonial states, for example. So in terms of nation building then, in terms of participation of individuals on the ground, you get better accrued benefit coming from opposition simply because one, you mitigate the possibilities of isolated cases coming from ethnic groups, for example, but two, you get a more dynamic discussion on how participation is most likely going to be accrued under their side. But on the metric of nation building then, coming from both comparison under government and opposition, it's only contingent coming from opposition because not only one are you able to accrue the benefit of a national artist, because opposition argues that if you're unable to fully establish the spotlight in which ethnic groups have already experienced just during colonization, you already incongruently in nature contradict towards the already inherent backgrounds that you came from, for example, meaning that you're less likely going to accrue maintaining the credentials and the identity that you already have, because the identity in which you as an artist that you translate on your art, for example, on a platform on macro scale, is already fragmented because you no longer achieve the most proximate interests in which ethnic groups that you're tied into your cultural background, for example. But notice that even if that our government argues that people are at least going to be more receptive better and understand collectiveness better under struggles under minorities, opposition already argues even if that's the case, then it's still better off because then you at least achieve the most proximate harm of the artist and tied into the cultural and individualistic aspects that also make their career and tied into better. So it all came down to which interest most caters to the utilization of the art in terms of portraying symbolism, as well as how can the actor out to weigh in towards the post-colonial states and how it affects people more so on the ground. But with all that being said, that ends my oral adjudication. If you'd like to ask for any personal comments, just DM in Discord. Thank you.
Hello, just confirming that I can be heard.
Yep, we're both audible and visible.
All right. All right, great. Hi everyone. Again, CJ here. You know already the decision, so I'll go straight to my justification as to why opposition won in the debate. Then, if I still have time later, I'll provide general feedback. Otherwise, you can just approach me for personal and general comments via Messenger or Discord. So, the first issue to which opposition won was in terms of the obligation of the artist. I think there were several reasons that opposition provided to win this clash. First, the artist has immediate family in this minority. Second, it speaks directly to their identity that they used to sell as a nationally revered artist. And lastly, they have the obligation that the stories of the minorities do not get silenced in the process of achieving a national identity. The reason why I felt like opposition wins this clash is that it's not clear to me why this obligation becomes waived or less relevant at the point at which the artist became nationally revered in government. So I kind of get that they are expected to please everyone within that nation because they are nationally revered in the first place. And I think this is where government's case relies on, right? Your case relies on the assumption that you get to cater to every struggle of the people within that state, because otherwise the same harms you impose in opposition will apply as your on your side as well, i.e., exclusion of other narratives, not getting external trust, being seen as selfish and unrepresentative, etc. There are several reasons as to why I felt like this didn't play out in the debate. First, then, I think this is the most important. I felt like government lacked mechanization in terms of what this unified struggle looked like, because I agree on the part that as a national artist, you need to be responsible with what you produce. Um, but it's not clear what is the process of reaching that national identity in government. For example, PM suggests that most attempts to create a unified identity is whitewashed and often majoritarian, and the artist has the capacity and ability to correct that. Government didn't explain how the artist corrects those majoritarian views on your side without reasonably assuming as a judge that you will also probably going to include bits and pieces of stories of the minorities that you are part of, right? So at that point in time, it's hard to see in government why exclusion does not happen completely in the process of depicting that unified struggle. And I think it was properly called out by opposition when they said that if you, as a national artist, is responsible for the majority of the people living in that state, then most likely you are going to prioritize the narratives of the majority. So at this point in time, government's burden is not just to explain where you are more obligated, but it shifted to being able to prove why the exclusion on your side will be unlikely or at least likely, a comparative that I wasn't able to catch in the latter government speakers. What this essentially means for the debate is that most of the harms relative to exclusion is something that I wasn't able to credit to the fullest extent because there was no clear process from government how you are going to include everything and everyone as a national artist to the art that you produce. So even if it's just two-liners from opposition, it's sufficient to tell me that you have that particular burden in government, especially when majority of your case relies on that particular harm. Compare that to the harms of resentment in opposition, that you will feel the frustration of your family members more, of your friends, of your community in general, harms that are more likely and tangible to the actor because they are related to these people, and the harms are certain because the deprioritization of their narratives is also certain in government. So by weighing, the harms provided by opposition was more certain, targeted, and exclusive, which highly affects the actor. In government, it's unclear how the harm is disabled on your side for me to believe that the harm is massively exclusive to opposition as well. The second reason is this unresponded framing from opposition that probably you're not the only national artist in your state who can be obligated to do that. So I then have to ask myself if government's explanation to pinpoint that responsibility to the actor is enough. So when you said that they are deeply respected by the people and that they are collectively selected by the people, you weren't able to explain the reasons why they are chosen in the first place efficiently. The best thing that I got from government is that the artist is more likely to have multi-facets of identities. That's why you represent everyone within that state. And that's also like the reason why you were collectively chosen by everyone at the end of the day. But I think it's very hard to buy, especially when the info slide explicitly says that you are a member of one ethnic minority. Opposition then makes sense when they pointed out that government wasn't able to prove why. The reasons for you becoming nationally revered in the first place is because you catered to the majority to begin with. They offered other alternatives of reasons that you might have been chosen because your unique approach on catering to unique struggles, etc. I want to clarify though that this didn't make them win the clash in opposition, but what that did was it created the deadlock on the intentions of the country to appoint you as a national artist, which makes this an irrelevant issue. So, absent those reasons for your recognition, I think there has to be a response then on why you should be the one doing this and not the other artists, reasons that are more compelling than what you provided in the round that was later on deadlocked by opposition anyway. The reason why that is important to be responded, I think like the earlier thing that I said about there are a lot of national artists in your state, was because if you have an obligation to your nation and you also have an obligation to your ethnic minority, opposition was correct in arguing that as an individual, you are more likely to err on the side without enough safety nets and that are more vulnerable. But as early as LO, they were able to point how vulnerable ethnic minorities or during post-colonization, that they are living in the most isolated states, that they don't have direct help, etc., that they are victims of cultural erasure, among others, which also like explains the urgency of being able to prioritize them more. Going to talk about the timeline issue later. Therefore, if government says that you are not neglecting these minorities as well, you have to tell me why you're able to help them, because it's not enough that you said that they will also benefit from the stories of unified struggle if, again, you weren't able to answer why it's not exclusionary by logic. Therefore, the value of maintaining credibility in government, all correct, is unclear to be achieved in government until you're able to tell me how that credible is being sustained on your side if other narratives will be deprioritized regardless in the process of like achieving this national identity or achieving a unified story of colonial struggles and like colonial recovery at the end of the day. Lastly, I want to talk about the timeline, and I'm going to explain why, even if opposition wins this particular debate, this is something that I don't find more important than the earlier things I was able to mention. I think that the one of the strongest cases as well of government relies on the idea that they are going to help the minorities, but not just now, because people are still sensitive to the impacts of colonization and how like vulnerable they was and how like traumatized they was. Meaning like the more priority is to be able to create a unified struggle first, or like stories of unified struggle or arts of unified struggle, and then we can help the minorities later. Number one, I'm just not sure how that really translates, or like the assurance of being able to help minorities in the future at the end of the day. So while I do get the idea that people are still sensitive, that people are still traumatized at the end of the day, it's not clear to me why the answer to that is being able to create a common story of like unified struggles at the end of the day. Again, that still ties back to your problem on not being able to paint what that looks like at the end of the day. But secondly, I don't think that it is important, because at best the urgency of the problem was just neutralized by opposition. Because if you are just saying that we can prioritize them next time, because the more urgent problem is to be able to nation build. Number one, you weren't able to explain completely why the most important interest is to be able to nation build. I mean, like, while I get that it's intuitive for government to be able to prove that since you are a post-colonial state, your most important interest is like to nation build. I don't think that that's something that an average reasonable person should buy completely. I think there has to be more explanations as to why that's the most important interest. This is the reason why it was just deadlocked by the first characterization that came from leader of opposition about how urgent being able to look at the unique struggles of like ethnic minorities are, especially when they are also like the most vulnerable victims of colonization at the end of the day. So even if like the timeline debate plays out in the debate, the reason why it's not that important is because it was just neutralized by majority of the characterizations that came from opposition, which I don't think had pushbacks from any speaker from both government and opposition to be able to rationalize or reconcile with that particular issue, which makes it like a less relevant clash in the debate. So I think the most important issues then are the obligation and the implications towards the particular actor, and why the harms are more certain and targeted to that particular actor. And I guess like lastly on the metric of exclusivity, I felt like even if both teams have harms at the end of the day, the harms that opposition was able to mention, I guess, was more exclusive to government versus how government explained that. I don't think you're able to sufficiently tell me why the harm does not exist on your side, absent the mechanizations I was looking for in the earlier justification. So, yep, I guess my decision stands. Congratulations to the both of you, and good luck for the next two rounds for today. Thank you.
Thanks for
Uh,
the
Thank you,
thanks for the
Chair.
when Gov asked for personal comments for the chair, thank you. Like, if is it okay through voice or something?
Yeah. Do you want to like go
We
to?
can do it here if ever.
All right. Like I'll just wait for everyone to leave then.
Thank you.
Oppo also asked for SE. Okay,
Can
Oppo also asked for PC, but we can do it through chat.
all right. I can just message me then.
Okay, okay.